Hi, everybody. My name is Heleya Barros. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Teaching Artists. And I also work out here in Seattle at Arts Corps with this guy.
Peace, everyone. James Miles.
I just want to take a moment to thank all of the organizations who rallied together really quickly to throw this event together. So our partners at the Teaching Artists Guild, Johnstone is here.
Hi, everybody from Oakland, California.
The New York City Arts and Education Roundtable, we have 3 representatives from their board and staff here, Kim Olson, Erika Atkins, and Justin Daniel.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
The National Guild is also a partner organization with us. They were unable to be on this call today because they have an emergency board meeting. Creative Generation is one of our partners in this, as is the Teaching Artists of the Mid-Atlantic. Kim, did I forget anybody? I think that's all.
No, I think you got everybody.
This all happened we sent an email out about a week ago on Friday, and I said, I think we need to do something, and everybody rallied together. So I'm going to share my screen here to make sure that you all can sort of see the agenda flow for what we're doing today. Can you all see that, the Google Doc? Great. So our goals here today are to talk about how employment status can impact organizational support, whether or not you're an independent contractor or a part-time employee as a teaching artist. How can teaching artists advocate for themselves with their partner organizations and also as freelancers? Building a community in times of crisis, which I'm already very heartened to see just by the incredible registration for this event, and also how many people are coming here from around the country and the world. And then how can we connect as our community to talk about how the virus is impacting our work, and how can we leverage our shared knowledge to offer plans and procedures in response. I just want to say that there are more than 700 people that have registered for this webinar. We've never done anything with this large of an audience before, so bear with us as we try to navigate a large audience. We most likely will not get to everybody's questions. We have 2 people who are monitoring both the question and answer and the group chat, which I'm gonna go over in just a second here. Here's our layout for our 90 minutes together. Kim's gonna do introductions in a second. Then we have a labor lawyer, David Wright, who's based in Maryland, who's going to speak to some of the teaching artist compensation and labor issues surrounding this crisis. We're going to have an organizational spotlight from both Opening Act, that's based in New York City, and Arts Corps, that's based in Seattle, Washington, about how these 2 organizations have responded to the crisis and how that is taking a toll on the nonprofit industry. Then we're going to hear from Jean, who's been speaking a lot with the international community and lessons learned for countries that are sort of ahead of us in responding to this crisis. Kim and Justin are then going to walk us through some ideas for modifications for in-person instruction for those who still have classes currently happening. And then we're going to hear from John Holyoke at Lincoln Center Education, who has already been working for the past few years on online and distance learning and some ideas and strategies around that. These are our panelists that you'll be hearing from: Erika Atkins, the Deputy Director of Opening Act in New York; me, John Holyoke, the Lead Instructional Specialist from Lincoln Center Education in New York; Jean Johnstone, the Executive Director of the Teaching Artists Guild in San Francisco, California; James Miles, Executive Director of Arts Corps in Seattle; Kimberly Olson, who's the Managing Director of the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable in New York; David Wright, who is a partner and labor lawyer in Baltimore, Maryland. And then we have 2 fearless leaders trying to moderate our chat, Kenny Allen and Kinsey Keck. I think I messed your name up a little bit there. Because there are so many people here, using the chat function for questions is going to be a little bit hard to monitor. So I want to encourage people, if you have a specific question, to please use the Q&A feature that's on the bottom of your screen. You also have the ability to raise your hand, although I'll say with so many people, it's a little hard for us to see how that happens. So Kenny and Kinsey are trying to moderate that as best we can. We're gonna try to answer people's questions, but they're monitoring things that might already be coming up ahead of time. So be patient and bear with us. We're going to be downloading this entire chat. If there are things that we don't get to, we will try our best to provide resources afterwards for people. I just want to also note that this is being recorded and it's a live conversation that we are going to be publishing later, both with the chat and the video recording. So if anybody has objections to that, know that that's sort of what's happening. I think that's all I have. Kim, do you want to take us through some introductions?
Sure. I think you've mostly covered it. Let's see. So it's great to see that everybody is coming really from across the country. It's so wonderful to see that we have such great support and how robust our teaching artist community is and how resilient and how we are standing in solidarity in this moment. So very happy to see that. Out of curiosity, could you do the click the raise hand function if you have experienced cancellations in your classes or residency at this point due to the recent outbreak? So just give us a moment to get a sense of who's on the call and that's the reality right now. Great, I can repeat the question. Click the raise hand feature if you have experienced a class already or residency already be canceled due to the recent coronavirus outbreak. Nice, so I'm sure those are coming in now. Let's see, I think Heleya pretty much covered what I was going to cover, just with an extra caveat. So we all recognize that the situation is changing each day. It changes hour by hour at this point. And while none of us are by any means experts in the coronavirus and experts in what will happen an hour from now, we are really hoping to use this platform, as Heleya said, to leverage the knowledge of the community, to share best practices, and by seeing what other organizations and teaching artists are doing, use that as an advocacy tool, and then also pass along advocacy tools that you can use within your own organization as well. So I think for the sake of time, I'm now going to move us along to our third agenda item, which is talking about labor and teaching artist compensation.
Is that for me, David Wright, to pick up from?
So yeah, I just want to put a caveat here that that labor law differs, you know, from state to state, sometimes even city or county to county. So David is going to sort of frame this for us, but just know that it's very difficult for us to answer specific questions based on your locations all over the U.S.
So I'll take it up from there. And good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be on the call. I'm sorry that I'm only a talking head and not a video talking head. Let me begin by reiterating that caveat that I am a labor lawyer, an employment lawyer based in Baltimore. As such, I know Maryland law, I know federal labor law, and then I do not know the law of Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Virginia, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the reality we're working from. We're also working from a reality that law is always behind the curve. And obviously it's a lot of curves that we're hearing about right now, curve balls and curves in outbreak and the rest. So the law, unfortunately, is terribly suited to the circumstances that we have currently. That said, I'm impressed with this community coming together to try and think through how the law and other advocacy and efforts might take the sting out of this or help you all position yourselves as best as possible, both individually and for your programming and otherwise. So let me begin with an item that's noted on the agenda, which is the profound difference between an independent contractor and an employee. Almost all protections, sick leave, family medical leave, unemployment, things like that, are almost all geared towards an employer-employee relationship in the traditional sense. So, and not for an independent contractor. An independent contractor is assumed to bear both the risk and the reward for almost all circumstances. And if I understand kind of this group correctly, a lot of you in making a living and carrying out your programming are independent contractors. And I was browsing around this morning to see what protections, if any, might exist for independent contractors, and certainly from a view of Maryland law, and I think this extends to other states as well, there are not protections ordinarily. The only protections you have are what is within the four corners of any given contract for the services that you provide. So, to the extent there are protections about termination of an agreement and cancellation notices and deposits for work or supplies or services or efforts, that is almost entirely derived only from the contract. And then I'll be curious to hear if I'm wrong at this point, but it looks like most of the contracts that I was browsing for independent contractors providing educational arts services don't tend to anticipate anything like what we're seeing right now. That's not surprising in this industry. It's not typical anywhere that anybody anticipated the sort of disruption that we're seeing now. And frankly, what I'm seeing out there is that there are no particular rules about the independent contractor relationship in this sort of circumstance. It's not much better for the employer-employee circumstance, except that you do have either by law or by employer policy or by collective bargaining agreement, if you're in a unionized setting, protections for sick leave, sometimes sick and safe leave, family care leave, that type of thing. Those vary, of course, either by state or also locally. You got to triangulate between the company handbook and the policies and the CBA, and then the law, of course. Most states, I reviewed this again this morning, most states do not have a sick leave law. But if you are an employee employed by any sort of decent agency, of course, they're going to extend your sick leave rights, and the definition for what is covered, how you can access that, how much you have, of course, is all covered locally. So, we can dive into that. It is, looking at the agenda about the coverage of sick leave, that is all basically on a case-by-case basis. In Maryland, we happen to have, as of 2 years ago, a rather broad sick and safe leave that allows for care of families and access in all sorts of circumstances. That is not necessarily the case everywhere. Unemployment insurance tends to be available only to employees and not ordinarily to independent contractors. That safety net element is not usually out there for employees. So what you have is circumstances that aren't well suited to this, but as I've been thinking about it over the last couple of days, I think as advocates, the issue is to frame this as a disruption that needs to be mitigated. And that's the approach that I'm recommending for my clients, both as employers and as advocates or employees, that everybody's going to get stung by this terribly. The issue is, how can you take the edge off? And for independent contractors, it becomes an issue about approaching those who you contract with to think very creatively about compensation and whether there's anything to be done about providing some compensation, even for work that isn't performed, with the idea of taking the edge off of the disruption to work and economics. For employees, I think most employers are trying to work from that perspective, but how much any particular employer is able to take the edge off is a very open question. So that's the framework that I've started to pivot to, because the law is so poorly constructed for this type of event. And frankly, as states increasingly declare states of emergency, even access to sort of lawful relief is being put to the wayside. And the places where you can get relief are going to be not available. Courts, for instance, in Maryland are operating from a partial schedules and partial capacity. So it's not as though the law is going to be a quick source of relief for anybody, even from its diminished place of not providing much relief generally. So that's all the bad news kind of summed up and framed. But I would be glad to have a conversation about any particular aspects of that. I'd ask the moderating team where we want to go with the conversation.
Thanks, David. I think that one question that has come up repeatedly is around what teaching artists can do, particularly those who are in these vulnerable populations, either teaching artists who are above 60 or have asthma or have immune compromised systems. What are their rights for not going to work in schools or community centers or in communities as teaching artists where programming is still happening? What are their options for compensation and or saying no to work?
Sure. If you are in a place where programming hasn't been taken down, and yes, you're looking at this circumstance and feeling unsafe or ill-prepared to deal with the risks, if you're an independent contractor, again, it depends on the contract itself about cancellation notices and terms for cancellation. And sometimes with a sophisticated contractor, you might have general policies that apply both to contractors and employees about those issues. But that's the first place to look. And within that framework, I think it's more about the individual relationships than any right to say no. I mean, certainly you always have the right to protect your health and say no. You can't be forced to work, of course. But if you don't work under a contractor situation, the contracting entity has every right to say that you didn't perform when they needed to, and that you won't be paid, or that you'll suffer whatever penalty the contract might provide. That said, I think that it's appropriate to pull up, for instance, the CDC guidelines about employer relationships right now, which very clearly say that employers and others who are providing services need to be flexible about those issues. That's a point they've made over and over and over again. This would apply to the employer-employee relationship, and I think it could be adapted to the independent contractor relationship. You can point to that federal CDC guidance and say, the CDC says you need to be flexible to protect my health and to protect the health of those who I might be teaching and interacting with, and I'm exercising that right, and I would hope that you're not going to penalize me in any way for that, and point them towards those resources. There's a really good CDC guide about it reiterates over and over again how employers need to fundamentally rethink access to leave, paid leave and unpaid leave, documentation notices and all that. So I would press that point with any employer or programmer who feels resistant to releasing a person who feels unsafe.
Thanks. Kenny, do you want to pop in here with some of the questions that might have come through with a Q&A for David?
Yes, let me see which one makes sense at this moment. We have Christina's asking about advocating to funders, allowing funds to be paid out to TAs whether or not classes happen in spring in light of the events.
Yeah. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. I think if you have benevolent funders who understand how disruptive this could be, how, the downstream consequences of losing 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 weeks worth of revenue needs to be impressed upon funders who, if they are thinking about a big picture, should be urged to come up with quick contingency plans that try to keep revenue flowing to those who depend on that revenue for rent. And maybe, these are uncharted waters, and I think we have to be candid about that and creative about it. It is, in most instances, there's not going to be a legal obligation to pay for services that weren't rendered or to provide leave that would otherwise go beyond a leave allowance. But to have people be totally displaced and upended isn't going to serve the program or the educational mission overall in the long run. If everybody is put in such a dire circumstance, or if a lot of people are put in such a dire circumstance, I think that just has to be made plain and then thought about creatively.
David, I also wonder if you can talk, for those who are independent contractors, we're getting some questions around if they form a small business, will they then be able to apply for some of the federal relief for small businesses that we're seeing come down from the Senate?
That's an interesting question. I have not yet seen the particulars of how that bill is being framed and how that relief is being framed. I worry that forming an entity now to try to match whatever the qualifications might be would be difficult and probably wouldn't give you safeguards. It might be better, quite frankly, to very quickly advocate to Congress. I mean, just, if to the extent that we all have time or more time because of this issue, push it with those federal policymakers that it's not just about small businesses. It is about individuals who are in these circumstances. I think you probably have to change the law rather than change your entity type. That might be that as daunting as that might be the more, the better way to go.
And then I think there's a lot of questions around unemployment. I wonder if you can just walk people through in a general sense, because I know unemployment varies from state to state, but in a general sense, what options are available to people for filing for unemployment?
It does. The processes and benefits do vary wildly from state to state. Maryland's is incredibly idiosyncratic, but certainly in all instances, the better course is to, if you are lawfully allowed to apply, and I would use that term broadly, you do. And again, I think anticipating how states and the federal government might react, you want to get on file, if nothing else, to preserve two things: to kind of drum up the numbers so that there's more data for the states and the federal government to use to say that unemployment has swelled because of this, and also to kind of get a claim on file, whether or not, depending on any given person's circumstances, they would qualify, either based on work thresholds or employment status or the circumstances here, the duration of the layoff, that kind of thing. regardless of whether or not you think you might qualify, if it's cognizable, I think you do it so that if later on your state relaxes its standards or increases its benefits, you've kind of made that claim and you've made it known. I think it's easier from that standpoint than not. And usually filing for unemployment these days is usually a matter of getting online or making a phone call. You know, there's very rarely going into any particular office these days.
Kenny and Kinsey, are you seeing any other questions that are rising to the top for David?
I see this is a really interesting one from John. What point will a TA want to stay home and force a program to close that might otherwise endanger youth that live in a dangerous area in South/West Chicago for us? How do we mitigate that and support our TAs who are considering that choice?
Oh, that's interesting. So number one, I would speak from my perspective as a labor lawyer, which is in most instances, and this varies from the private sector and to the public sector, in most instances, if individuals come together and perform a work action for their mutual aid and protection. So if individuals are concerned about a safe and healthy working environment and share that among each other and resolve to stay home or file a petition to close the program or to close the school or close the facility, or whatever the case might be, that is often, but not always, but often protected from adverse consequences. So, I would urge anybody who's thinking about pressing the point and pressing their employer or their program to action to think through whether they have that protection, find out quickly, and then to do so. And I think it's, I think that is a policy-wise, we're going to see that be protected more often than not, particularly if you kind of make a record about who's doing it and why and what particular circumstances have caused people to be in fear. In any, if there's a feeling that a particular employer is behind the curve, document it, make a record, and then act. I mean, people have to be safe first and foremost.
So I see we have about 2 minutes left in this section. Something that the panelists wanted to make sure we shared. In this case, in every case, information is an advocacy tool. In terms of compensation, there's been this really great website that was created entitled COVID Freelance Artist Resources. It's been posted earlier in the chat, but we'll post it again shortly. In there, let's see, I also just posted it myself. In there are several emergency relief funds and grants that independent artists can apply for at this time. We also encourage teaching artists to advocate within their own organization. And we've put together a list of questions that we think are sort of the top line items that you should be asking your organization when it comes to the very specific laws within your state, county, as it relates to sick pay, as it relates to, let's see, your eligibility, how you can use sick time, and so forth. And we'll be posting it in the chat momentarily and then also forwarding it afterwards as well.
Just to clarify, I know we're at time for this section, but we've got multiple people asking about whether independent contractors are eligible to apply for unemployment. David, can you take a quick swing at that one?
My quick swing would say that they ordinarily are not, but again, I would, in every state and in every instance, double check that assertion. And if there's kind of a cognizable claim, make it, and then always, in making a claim for unemployment, lay out all the relevant circumstances. Nobody should get in trouble by misrepresenting their circumstances to unemployment. So you got to be, put it out there and see where it goes. That's not a very satisfying answer, but it's unfortunately, I just can't speak beyond kind of the boundaries of Maryland.
Sure, that's helpful though, I think. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, David. That was really informative. I know that there were more questions that we didn't get to. What I'd like to encourage everybody to do is look up the unemployment laws within your own cities, states, and areas and counties. And also, if your local government has any sort of email alerts, I really encourage you to sign up for them because laws are changing. I would say that even in Washington, the unemployment laws have changed as cities start to declare states of emergency. So really follow up on where you are so that you can keep up to that. And we'll look through our questions after this and see if we can provide additional answers that, again, are relevant to everybody, but knowing that each municipality is really different. And with that, I think we're going to move on to opening act and arts course, sort of giving us a state of where they are.
Great. Hi, my name is Erika Atkins. Heleya said before, I am the Deputy Director at Opening Act. We're an after school, well, not just after school anymore. Now we are a theater program in the New York City area, and we serve predominantly high school, but also middle school students. So we really, of course, in New York, I feel like everyone really started paying attention last week, was when we really started assessing, oh, this is probably going to be a big thing for us too. And so we started monitoring everything, partially because we had a gala coming up on April 6th, which has a big impact, obviously, on our income. So we were hoping to be able to move forward with it. However, on Tuesday, we made the decision to cancel our 20th anniversary gala. And so that was a decision we didn't take lightly, but one of the things we really wanted to think about was not only the organization, but like our community as a whole. Our gala certainly would have had over 500 people in the building, and it just didn't seem safe. So we made the decision to cancel our gala at that point, and we informed our staff members, and we told our teaching artists that decision had been made as well after we made it. So we also, this past week, made a staff decision to work remotely. This week was more of a choice whether or not you wanted to work remotely. Some people, our office is in Dumbo, Brooklyn. If you know New York at all, Dumbo, Brooklyn is not the most convenient place to get to. So some of us have long transportation, like long commutes to work, and some of us do not. So we made a choice that it was up to you. If you could walk to the office and you wanted to, up to you. And if you wanted to stay home and work from home, up to you. For this upcoming week, we actually decided just to have everybody work from home. And that was a decision that we made as a staff as well. We've really included a lot of our staff in the decisions that we're making. It wasn't just something that everybody on the executive team said that they were going to do. And I'm going to let Justin talk about how then this impacts our teaching artists and how we're working to include teaching artists in the decisions that we make going forward.
Thanks, Erika. Hey, everyone. Justin Daniel, Associate Director of After School Programs. So once we made the decision as a staff to work remotely, yesterday we made the decision to pause all of our programming for the next week, so starting this coming Monday. For us, there were two main reasons why we came to this decision. One, we wanted to assess the equity of the situation and really take a moment to think about, okay, well, if staff is working remotely, then let's look at the equity issues around having our teaching artists continuing to go into schools. We also thought about how Department of Education teachers are given access to healthcare and other services should they become ill, and our teaching artists are not getting those same, they're not getting the same access, at least not through us. So that was one of the reasons. The second reason is we really wanted to get some time so that we could include teaching artists into the decision-making process around next steps. It's really important for us that teaching artist voice is at the forefront of decisions that we made. And if we don't have the time to do that, it's really hard. So what we're doing is, instead of our regular scheduled after school times, so this coming week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, rather than going into the schools and teach, our teaching artists are joining us for digital, we're calling them town halls, where we can really just talk this through with teaching artists, strategize about next steps, and just in general make sure that their voices are heard. And we are, for next week, we're paying our teaching artists as they normally would be paid.
And the last two things I will say about Opening Act is, so as Justin said, we're having conversations with our stakeholders, which include like our board, members of our committee, a community, people who had committed to doing fundraising around our gala. And so, of course, one of our largest stakeholders is our TAs. So as Justin mentioned, we're bringing them into the conversation to talk about, make plans around compensation and how this really affects the sustainability of our organization, because I'm sure, as you can guess, the gala was a big part of not only our income, but our current cash flow. So we're going to start working with our community together to make plans going forward. And we're very early in our decision making. So if anybody has any questions about what we decided to do, you can reach out and ask me.
Greetings, everyone. I'm James Miles, the Executive Director of Arts Corps here in Seattle. As you know, we're at the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak. So we've been preparing for a long time. Our 20th anniversary was also coming up next week. Funny story, I was one of Opening Act's first teaching artists way back in the day. So I love Opening Act.
James, can you get a little closer to the microphone, please?
I don't want to. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Shit, I got it. I'm spilling water everywhere. So we've canceled our gala. Schools are closed, and they will be closed until April 24th. That is being optimistic. My guess is schools won't come back until September. So if this happens in Seattle, I'm sure it's going to happen across the nation, where we'll have no more school for maybe a year. During the Spanish flu in 1918, schools were closed for a year, and that was to preserve the health and well-being for people. So I just, not to be a doomsday sayer, but just getting prepared for these things to happen. What we're doing is we're paying our teaching artists throughout this time that they're out for all of their prep work. If that makes sense. So everyone's being paid prep. And then we're also doing online art making. We have a program called Learning Immersive Technology, AKA LIT, where students are learning about virtual reality and gaming. So that's an easy class to teach online. We have our Youth Speaks poetry class and team leadership course that are happening remotely via Zoom or Google Chat. We're also developing art kits, dropping them off at schools, community centers for students to take home and keep, for them to make art anyway, which is our tagline. And then throughout the day, we are reaching out to not just our funders and not just our supporters and community, but also to grant makers and foundations to say, just because schools aren't happening doesn't mean the work stops. We are continuing to work, and we need your support now. I'm reaching out to foundations and grant makers from across the country, especially those that I used to work with in New York, those that I work with here in Washington State, and really advocating for the arts education community, artist community.
James, I'm going to pause you for a second. Just panelists, there's somebody that has background music coming in. If you could just make sure you're muted as James is talking, that'd be great. Thank you. James, please continue.
Just what I think what's really key is community and collective action. So a united voice to funders, to foundations, to supporters, to donors, knowing that everyone's on tough times. The stock market fell rapidly. It's been the worst drop in 30 plus years. It rebounded a bit today, thanks that Trump declared it a national emergency finally. Yet still, we need everyone to be involved and to support. And one way we're trying to do that, instead of doing a fundraiser, we're doing a Tiny Desk inspired concert in our office on next Friday, March 20th at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, to really just engage the community in both art making, in teaching artistry, in young people, and in the need to support, you know, nonprofits, not just ArtsCore, but all nonprofits in this time of dire stress. Do I have anything else to add to that?
I just want to add too that one thing that an idea that came from one of our faculty that we instituted this past week, and now that schools are closed, it's a little bit moot, but we started pooling our sick time, and we also allowed staff to donate their PTO into the paid sick time policy too, because not every teaching artist has enough of that accrued to actually cover all the classes if they actually were not well. And until schools closed here, anyone who basically had a sniffle, we couldn't send to schools. So I just want to offer that as a thing that you might want to ask some of your organizations, because it came from a teaching artist themselves asking for that. And it's been a really great benefit to our faculty when schools were still open. Kenny, were there any questions that came in during any of that?
There are a few questions. One comes from Laura Cole, and she's wondering, my question is for staff and organizations, what are you telling your TAs for summer programming? She says she wants to know what to tell them to hopefully keep them positive about future employment.
Yeah, we are supporting the teaching artists. So as long as ArtsCore is open, teaching artists will be compensated. That's basically the message. So let's make sure our doors stay open.
I mean, our big message is, oh, sorry.
I was also thinking of innovative ways to still hold programming, like these art kit drop-offs where schools who are closed here are still providing free meals. So trying to engage in that way, trying to engage in online learning. And as we have seen the rest of the teaching artist community really like galvanize in this past week to rapidly change the way we teach.
Yeah, our big message is we're going to figure this out together. So we have a history of being very transparent with our teaching artists, including over the past year, we've done finance workshops with them to explain what our budget looks like, we've explained to them how we hire and et cetera. This is work we've already done, which has kind of actually led us to this moment where since we're already transparent with our teaching artists, like we're going to invite them into this conversation now and be transparent with them about where we are and then see how we can figure it out together.
Great. So I think we're going to move on to Jean, who has been speaking with some of our international colleagues who've been affected by this for a little bit longer than us.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. This is Jean Johnstone at Teaching Artists Guild. I'm working from home with a family home from school. So if you're hearing background noise, forgive us. I've been chatting with some colleagues in Hong Kong and in Australia, as well as South Korea, to just kind of hear what's been going on over there and how this has affected artists and teaching artists specifically. One of the commonalities overall is that what they call in Australia casual workers or freelance workers, independent contractors, are very common across the world in the arts, and protections are scarce for them as well. So it has been a challenge. But the other commonality is the creative thinking going on in the industry around how best to keep people working unemployed wherever possible. So that creativity has entailed things in Hong Kong, for example, before large gatherings were canceled, finding ways to create that space. So in a theater, making rows empty in between folks, or spacing people every other seat, these kinds of measures just to keep groups thinned out, but still be able to bring in people to the arts. And of course, lots and lots of online learning. Hong Kong is ahead of the curve on this online learning in a couple of ways. Schools have been closed there since January. But even before then, schools were closed and students were doing online learning because of the civil unrest there. As many people know, there have been a great deal of protests happening there. And so learning had been moved online in a number of cases. So for teachers who are working, who are teaching the arts within that environment in the school day, they've been continuing on to do that online in interesting fashions. But for those other independent workers and artists, that's been pretty touch and go. I spoke with some folks at a small arts providing organization, drama specifically, and they said they've been able to do things like produce quick videos with their 5-minute videos with their teaching artists to be online classes and things of that nature to share out with students, but otherwise it's hard times all around. Let's see here. Let's see. In South Korea, the elementary and middle and high schools have been shut for the last 3 weeks, and right now they're scheduled to be shut for 1 more week. And planning to open up on March 23rd. That is as of an email yesterday, but we'll see how that goes. But all classes had been moved to online during that time. So community centers, art studios, performing arts centers were all temporarily closed, no after-school programs, no extracurricular programs, and so on. Of course, they've been very successful in stemming the flow of the virus because of these actions, but it's been a serious problem for their teaching artists who are not affiliated with institutions because those who can't teach are not receiving a paycheck. One of the most, there have been various municipal measures to try to deal with this, not specific to the arts necessarily, but for example, in Hong Kong, where I should add trust in the government is very, very low right now. There's a stimulus package put together, so every citizen received 10,000 Hong Kong dollars, which I believe is a little over $1,000 in US currency for the month to help get folks through, and that was regardless of what kind of worker status you have. But a lot of the struggle for arts organizations and arts education providers has been because the nature of the arts, it has been difficult to move things online, and a lot of creative grappling about what that means, what that looks like, and perhaps an opportunity for us to kind of think about how arts education can approach that more holistically. And we're going to hear from someone in a few moments about some of those efforts. Let's see here. I'm just checking notes as we go here. If there are any questions that have come in, do let me know. But that's kind of the general briefing from those regions.
I have a question that may be not so much specifically international, but Andre is asking, are there support networks or civic organizations for independent artists and workers who are immigrants? Do we have specific support networks that we know of? Anyone in this group?
That's a great question. I'm not aware of that, but we can do some poking around and add that to whatever we find to the list of resources that'll go out after the call. Absolutely. I know that, yes, our immigrant populations and folks who are already struggling to make ends meet are going to be particularly hit hard by this. And some of the things that Erika and James were mentioning earlier, I just want to bring back up and highlight again, because this is something that we're seeing across the board. Fortunately, we're a creative field, but these ways to stay somewhat in business, paying teaching artists for prep work, developing online programs if you don't have them already. The art kits, I think that's a fantastic idea, especially if you're working in school districts, because as they continue to close down, and I know in New York and California and Oregon and Washington and a number of states, the closures are coming fast and furious here. But lunches and food is still being provided to students. So that's a great opportunity to figure out how we can bring in those kits, for example, as part of take-home work, or something of value to bring to young people who are coming together to get food and so on. We've heard input from various people, both organizations and individuals in the United States as well as internationally, that are finding creative ways to bring their teaching artists into the office to help with whatever needs to be done. And if small gatherings are still allowed in your city or county or state, then that's a really great way to keep people working. And again, that united voice to funders and to our supporters. It's a bizarre time, but a unique opportunity to really make folks understand how unreplaceable arts education and teaching artists are, regardless of how much high tech we have around us.
We have time for one more question in this area. I'll take that as a yes for now. Jean, we've been asked, what do you think is the biggest lesson we can learn from international arts providers who have been experiencing this for longer?
That's a great question. From the people that I've talked to yet, I think that one of the big thing is I mean, of course, finding ways to creatively keep paying people throughout this. We don't know how long this is going on, but so far, the bright lights that we are seeing are coming from countries who worked really quickly to flatten the curve. So although the effects were drastic over this couple month or several month or several week time period, they're able to, they're looking at emerging from that potentially soon. So taking drastic, what may feel like a drastic measure in the short term is probably the right thing to do to get folks back on their feet faster. Thinking creatively about ways to pay people and coming up with interesting ways to interact with communities throughout this. And then finally, morale. One of the hardest pieces across the folks in the countries in Asia that I spoke to was how hard this has been on morale. And on the one hand, that's kind of a no-brainer. Of course, this is very challenging for everybody, but realizing what an impact that has had and finding ways within your communities, within your organizations, within your peer groups and colleagues to support each other, whether in whatever form that can come, keeping people's chins up through a sense of community, transparency in your organization. It's okay to say, we don't know what we're doing yet, but we're going to work through this together. All of those things go a really, really long way in keeping people feeling connected and keeping the morale up. So I hope that helps a
We have
little.
time for another question. For organizations here and abroad that are offering online instruction, how are you acting and gathering students? Is that through the schools or are teachers and principals giving outside arts organizations access to Google Classroom accounts or list of emails? Do we as organizations invite groups of kids into Zoom meetings, or are online arts programs only integrating into existing online learning initiatives?
That's a great question, and the answer, as far as I know of, is all of the above. Organizations that have relationships with schools currently have contacted those schools in many cases and found ways to plug into what they're doing with the online platforms. And other folks, small organizations, have gotten creative, created their own content, and have been sharing that out in the ways that they can, and trying to anticipate reopening and kind of leveraging those resources towards a few months down the line. Hopefully, hooking in students now with excitement for what will come potentially.
Jean, I'll also jump in and share a resource that's been shared to me from the conference community is the use of YouTube livestream, which doesn't require student login. It's free to have an account. It's free to broadcast to your community. However, there is a 24-hour lag time between the time that you actually activate your account to the time that you're able to use it. So that's another great avenue to be able to share with students in a free capacity that doesn't require email address access.
Fantastic, great. There's a number of platforms that people are using, and I don't know all of them offhand, but I can pull those together too, and we can share that out as part of a resource. Yeah, thank you.
Are we ready to move to Kim and Justin talking about modifications?
Great. So Justin, Daniel, and I are going to talk a little bit about modifications for in-person instruction. We recognize that everybody really is in a different place with the impact of this virus in your community. While some schools are closing and having to move to this distance learning place, there are schools that are still in session where modifications will have to be made in terms of physical contact or how tactile lesson plans can be in terms of sharing of materials and whatnot. We're finding here in New York just how quickly behaviors can change and people will listen as we model in the classroom, such as that 20-minute 20-second hand washing. And people really taking to using song as a way to measure how long you should be washing your hands, things of that nature. So we wanted to use the next few minutes. We're going to offer some modifications that we brainstormed, but really we have this wonderful brain trust right now on this call. So as we are talking, I ask that you please just start to, in the chat box, offer modifications that you have started to implement in your classroom. I'll start and then I'm going to throw it over to Daniel. As I sit in this Bronx school right now, something I didn't realize was the use of the microphone and how tactile that can be for students. The students I teach are specifically those with disabilities who have oftentimes will blow into the microphone, will want to put their mouth to the microphone. So having to take that resource away today or have it be adult controlled with then all sanitary baby wipes and Kleenex wipes at the ready was something I noticed. But Daniel, I know you have many more to share as also people start to add in their modifications that they've started to implement in the classroom.
Sure. I'll start with, so at Opening Act, we have a closing ritual in all of our workshops called Pass the Pulse. It's certainly not exclusive to Opening Act. You stand in a circle, you hold hands, you squeeze the hand of the person next to you, and that sends around the circle. And we have done it since the 20 years ago when we started Opening Act. And one of our teaching artists offered 2 weeks ago that maybe we should modify that. So we changed it to either you could do foot taps or a simple nod around the circle. And our students very quickly were grateful and accepted that quite quickly. Another example that we were talking about is oftentimes teaching artists will use a ball or some sort of tactile thing to pass around. Maybe it's like, if I'm holding the ball, I'm speaking. So that is something that you could pantomime. You don't necessarily even have to pass around a ball. I have been hearing from musicians, music teaching artists, about how important it is to sanitize and wipe down all instruments in the classroom. And then one thing that I have personally done is make sure we have enough chairs for students to sit in, rather than having people sit on the floor, which often happens. But beyond that, we would love to harness the brilliance of the group. So if you could just throw out some ideas into the chat, and we'll share some of them vocally, but then we will compile all of them and share digitally. So yeah, what are some things that you all are doing now to modify?
Some I've seen so far as people start to write in regarding the microphone. Lisa O suggests you can use a cover of sort and change the cover for every student. I think just saran wrap works. That could be one. Latanya has said, asking the school to provide larger spaces for your classes, such as an auditorium or gym, so that students can spread out during class. Welcome, Peter from Ghana. Let's see. Moving scene work to monologue work, videotaping it and then sharing it on screen. Let's see. A modification, asking in-school teachers to help make sure that students keep a 5 to 6 foot distance from the teaching artists. I know that's something I encountered today. A lot of my students are eager to hug me. They want to come over to me. They want to hold my hand. And I didn't always have the language to say why we had to keep our distance today. So having that at the ready is something that I know I'll be preparing as long as I'll be going into schools. Making sure that tables and chairs are being wiped down if the school is not doing that yet. Also advocating for your organization to provide you with those resources is another great tool, so that you have that to know that it's happening in your space. Moving classes outdoors when possible. For music class this morning, played music while the toddlers washed their own shakers and washed their hands at the same time. It was a fun activity and a necessary task. Let's see. Oop, they're coming in quick, great.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is good.
Yeah.
Keeping supplies specific for individuals instead of a communal box that everyone sticks their hand in.
For students that want to hug, I tell them to do a self-hug while I perform a self-hug with eye contact, so the student can have that comfort and connection with me. Great.
Somebody just posted a resource for music teaching artists to a Facebook group that has a lot of ideas. So we'll make sure that that's available to everybody. Great.
Great.
So as they continue to come in, we'll compile them and share them out. But one thing we also just wanted to mention is this is obviously, we're sort of in the middle of it, but at some point we will go back into classrooms if we have been taken out of classrooms or soon to be taken out of classrooms. There will be that day where we go back in, and just something to be mindful about as we do when that moment comes, that we sort of ease in to these practices and really think about how we can mitigate anxiety for students. I'm a theater teaching artist, and so I think we often take for granted the tactile physical touch, and actually Opening Act as an organization has been talking about modifying our activities anyway. Why do we need to have so much physical touch within activities? But just to be mindful of that as we do go back in, that anxieties may be high.
Okay, I think with that, we're going to move on to John from Lincoln Center Education, who's going to speak more about options for digital learning, which I think a lot of us are going to be learning how to do quite quickly in the next day, if you haven't already figured out how to do it in the past week. Anybody who teaches in college, I think, has rapidly tried to figure that out in the past week.
Terrific. John, are you there?
I am here.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm really
me.
thrilled to have you speak to everybody today about what you know and you've been developing and doing there at Lincoln Center we can all learn from.
Great. And I'll speak about, particularly in the past few years, incidentally, by the way, I'm also working from home. So my daughter is practicing cello in the next room. That was the soundtrack you heard in the background.
Ah, delightful.
If there are 700 people in this, then that is the largest concert that she's ever given in the background of somebody else's presentation. And maybe if she pitches it again here. So I had the pleasure in the, I guess, year before last to work with Brad Haseman community, and some of you may know. Whoops, hold on just a second. There we go. I'm back in.
Oh, your sound was better before. That was good.
Am I good now?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. And anyway, we worked together on an online course for teaching artists on the Cadenza platform. And it was a collaboration between Lincoln Center Education, Sydney Opera House, and Queensland it's present, it's still there, Queensland Performing Arts Center for the training of teaching artists. So what I can speak to briefly right now is some of the things that we thought about when we were creating it on that platform. And then I think what I'll do is crowdsource a little bit about other platforms that we all might use to build something to deliver. But I think my time will best be spending about what we ran into and how we thought about it a little bit. So in the agenda, I don't know if everybody got it. I tried to share a link. I don't know if it's going to work. If it doesn't work, that's okay. We'll share it out later. But Brad and I put together a little truncated version of a larger handbook that we share with people who are trying to design courses on the Cadenza platform. The platform contains different modes of delivering instruction, which are similar to things that are out there on various platforms. Chat rooms, a gallery where you can display your work and talk about it, video lectures, these kinds of options. And at the back of the packet, if everybody has it, if you don't, it's all right. There are a list of the various things that are available to choose from. I think that the most important thing I would want to say about this, as we went through the process, and as we've tried to help other people go through the process, is to really think about what the goal of your lesson or your learning is. What are you trying to get people to take away? And then choose the kind of delivery channel that's appropriate for that goal. So in other words, if you are trying to deliver instruction about something that's a skill that's in a kind of enclosed context, there aren't a whole lot of variables, potentially like learning how to play an instrument or learning how to, musicians out there may check me and that's fine. Or learning how to train somebody to master some kind of software, then the kind of traditional lecture and quiz might actually work. That's why Khan Academy works, because of the kind of content it's delivering. But of course, our challenge is that's not, for the most part, the kind of content we're delivering. It might be. If you're thinking a little bit more about scenarios where there are many variables or people are sharing things creatively, then you're going to want to find platforms that allow people to share creative work in forums and discuss it together. Of course, we ran into the same challenge that probably many of you will, and that is we had the fortune of we were trying to create teaching for other people to learn how to teach. And that meant that we could get a lot done by showing people footage of workshops rather than trying to create a workshop live in a digital space. Now, the folks at Sydney Opera House did create workshops live on the platform, and that worked really, really well. But we found that we could balance what you lose in live experiences, because you lose something when you enter a digital platform. But what you gain is being able to look at something again, access something again, watch something again multiple times. So for us, some of what we lost, we gained in that other area. So for us, so the goal is the most important thing. I would also add that when we get this document out to you, Brad, who's really done research on online learning, has identified some, what he calls, what we call in the document, principles of learning. And when you see them, many of you out there, they're going to seem self-evident to us. They're not self-evident to all teachers out there, but to artists, you may feel like you recognize them. I'm sure you will. But they're useful to note that even on online platforms, it's engaging when people are creating things. It's powerful when you drive things with stories. Simulations are very powerful online. You can use context online that is actual or hypothetical. Repeated observation, as I mentioned, is a powerful tool. Using those convening forum spaces can really, really be quite powerful. It can be, when people are in there at the same time, an interesting corollary to classroom conversation, especially because a lot of students are used to digital platforms as a space for conversation anyway. So it feels pretty intuitive to a young person to be carrying on what feels like a spontaneous conversation on a chat or device. Making sure that your course is coherent, that the language runs all the way through what you're delivering, which you do in a classroom anyway, and finding ways to use the platform to include reflection, as you probably would in a classroom, we found to be an important piece. So those are some of the things that we found ourselves thinking about when we were designing this course for teaching artists. And I can say more about it if questions come up. But I know that some questions have been coming up about, well, all right, what platforms can we find for that? And I can start that conversation and then turn it over to the group, really, and say that in recent days, we've been looking at Patreon as a kind of sponsor-based site where people could put things up, Facebook Live, other things that have chat channels. I do think that there is as much of a challenge as this moment presents us. It also presents an opportunity that, all of these kids are still out there at home looking for things to do. And I know at Lincoln Center, we're thinking really hard about how to service that, which we can do as a community, not just thinking about how to reach back out to that classroom that we're no longer in, but how to reach out to a whole community of young people or families who are probably out looking for ways to engage themselves. So the question, I think, for our robust 700 people strong community that we're convening right now is how to promote teaching artistry and us as individual deliverers of experience on online platforms as a thing that people can seek out. And if we can manage to get it out there to the world as something that anybody who is going stir crazy can look for and engage, I think we might invent a new channel for ourselves that's here now and in the future. So I'll stop there and see what other people had to say.
Oh, that's fantastic. Kinsey and Kenny, do you have any specific questions that have come in specifically for John on the online learning?
We have a few individual use cases, people struggling figuring out how to translate their specific practice to online learning. Does that make sense as a question right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So Peggy is asking, she says, I'm a jeweler and I teach at art centers that have well-equipped studios. Most of my students come to class for access to the tools as well as my expertise on how to use them and the one-to-one coaching on their projects. I'm having a tough time thinking about how to translate this to distance learning. Any ideas?
And I will crowdsource this as well because, I'm going to give my thought on it, but I recognize myself as kind of an equal respondent as other people probably are out there in this conversation. But it seems to me if you could find a digital design tool that is the closest equivalent you can find to the tactile material that you are using and enter into explorations in that way. I totally recognize what is lost. at the tactile level, probably with the specific metals and materials that you would otherwise be using. But if there are other design concepts that kind of sit on top of the tactile work that could be applied to something digitally, that's what I would do to seek that out. But I'd be interested to know if anybody has other solutions.
Great. We also have a
suggestion from
the, yeah.
Sorry. A quick suggestion from the chat box regarding that question was think of what types of beads or materials you can be making at home with like spare materials, matting, newspaper beads, things like that. Moving on to another question, another thing for beads for testing for their music theory.
Say that again.
Can see your audio is pretty rough. Want to try again?
Yes, can you hear me now?
That's a lot better.
Oh, sorry. Did you hear my comment about the chat box?
It was pretty broken up. You want to repeat that and then?
Sure.
Thanks.
So in regards to the jewelry question, a chat box suggestion was doing found object jewelry. So finding materials in your home and using them to create beads like newspaper and things like that. And then a following question was someone was asking for ideas for testing for a music.
Oh, I lost it again. I got everything. Somebody had a question up to testing.
Sure. The
Does anybody else have to hear it?
Yeah, the question is, they're looking for ideas for testing related to a music theory class.
Testing. All right. Well, we didn't, a lot of learning platforms will have testing. You could take a look at one thing that I was just looking at earlier, the H5P templates allow you to say, record a video and then insert quiz-like material at certain junctures in the video. So people are absorbing something and then it pauses, and then you can insert something to see if they've understood the information that you've laid out so far. I don't know if that answers the question.
I'm seeing other.
Here comes some more.
Some other options pouring in from the crowd about different platforms to use, and we'll collect all those and make this part of the resource going out.
Yeah, keep sending them in. We'll ship them out.
Keep them coming.
We have another question about project-specific teaching, people who have kids in rehearsals for projects. Any ways to help translate those to online learning?
Well, so in other words, like they're doing a show together or something like that?
Sounds like it.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'll tell you what, I haven't had to have the experience, but I once again, I think this is an instance of if our community can figure it out, it'll be useful for years to come. I would put it out to the group. I'm wondering how a forum like this right now that we're having could be used for certain kinds of rehearsal. I could see this tool just how we're demonstrating its utility right now being useful to a certain extent to try to replicate rehearsals from home. It would be tricky, I guess, if you're having dialogue between two people, but I don't have the answer to it, but I bet we are the people as a whole to get that answer.
You're here.
Can I just pipe in here too to say, for anybody who is members of any performing arts unions like Actors Equity or the musicians unions, I really urge you to reach out to your union reps to get them to try to make modifications to our contracts that would allow for streaming capabilities during this, because that is something that would really bring back a lot of work to artists and even potentially be able to bring things like student matinees there. So reach out to your union reps.
Mm-hmm.
This is David Wright. I would second that feeling. If you are in a union, you got to communicate with them about all the issues and all the possible solutions. I mean, they're obligated to carry those solutions forward if they can.
Mhm. I'm seeing something coming in from Natalie Green in San Francisco. Hi, Natalie. And she's saying that many parents are already looking for creative ways to engage families during this time when kids are home from school, and that she's got a group of college students studying dance pedagogy, and considering maybe making videos for them to send home and so on, and thinking about distribution. So beyond someone's personal Facebook page, how might we get these out to specific groups? And I'm wondering actually what occurs to me, and I want to offer to the panelists here, is perhaps there's a way that we can be a resource for that too. Maybe, you know, between Teaching Artists Guild and ATA, we can do a resource page where folks are putting up videos of that nature, something like that. So just to be able to share that out from one platform as opposed to a bazillion million, like some way to kind of put that in one bucket for folks. Getting creative.
Yeah, I was thinking the very same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Kenny, is there any other burning last questions that we have for John?
I don't think so at the moment.
We're good.
Okay.
Excellent.
Well, I want to invite everybody now to take a moment to take a collective breath. It's something I've had to remind myself to do a lot in the past week. Things are changing very rapidly and it can be very scary, but I've been so moved by the way that the artist community has responded immediately in finding different ways to still provide art in a time like this. And I know that teaching artists are the most infinitely creative people on the planet. And if anybody can figure out a way to still bring art to youth and to communities, it is going to be this community. So thank you so much for everybody who came to join in on this. I know that we did not get to everybody's questions today, but Kim and Jean and all of us will go through all of these notes and try to put something together as soon as we can. But can we all just take a moment to take a breath together? I'd love everyone, since we can't get you on audio, if you'd like to do a little one-word checkout in the chat box, we'll pull those all together and make a little visual of them that we can share out later to provide some hope and inspiration to you all. So please do that. We'll leave the chat open for a little while. If you have further questions, put them into the Q&A. And just thank you so much again. I know this is a really busy time for everybody, and for you to carve out 90 minutes to spend with us was really important. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you to our panelists and to all of you all over the world, it looks like, sending out good thoughts and wishes, and we will follow up with all of these great resources. Thank you all so much.
Yes, please continue to, if you are on our email list, on our social media, please continue to follow those. As Heleya said, we're going to be compiling these lists. We also will be sharing a live, a recording of this live chat, along with a transcription of it, as well as the text from the chat box. So that will be available hopefully by the end of this weekend. So Jean, Heleya, we'll put our heads together on that.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.